Thank you, Gene. Appreciate it.
I'll be leaving now. I thought that was my contribution to the meeting tonight.
It was a good one. Thank you, Gene. So thank you. Appreciate it. So I want to.
I'll be leaving now. I thought that
start
was
the
my
meeting.
contribution to the meeting tonight.
At 6:33. It was a good thank you meeting. It's an unusual meeting, just for members of the public as well as the committee to be aware of that after a town election under school committee policy, I think it is BDA, the committee has an organizational meeting. And the purpose of this part of the meeting tonight is to elect a chair for my purposes. And then I'll turn it over to the chair and they will facilitate the selection of a vice chair and secretary. And so that's the reason I'm speaking, which is atypical. Usually the chair of the committee starts the meeting. But since we did have an election in the town of Amherst and new seated members, so welcome. I should introduce them. Before I turn over, Ms. McDonald has a point, and and then I explain the process. I want to welcome Irv Rhodes. I should say welcome Irv Rhodes back to the committee, former member. So welcome, Irv. And Jennifer Shao, thank you so much for joining the committee, and welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Mike.
I will, and Amherst Media, thank you for broadcasting this, as always, and Happy New Year to you. So we will go around and do the roll call attendance right now. I was hoping to wait and talk enough for other people joined, and that was successful. So I'm just going to do it in the order that I see it. So when I say your name, if you can just say present. So I'll start with Jennifer.
Present.
Sarah Bess.
Present.
Ben.
Present.
And Jean.
Present.
And Irv.
Present.
And Peter.
Present.
And Allison.
Present.
And Mr. Sullivan.
Present.
And also with us is our student representative, Ruby. I think the mute button is messing with you, Ruby.
Oh, no, my computer just froze. Present. Sorry.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you all. And thank you all again for joining and humoring me in this process. So the way the process typically works is we look for nominations. People can nominate someone else or they can nominate themselves. In general, our past practice is that we do look for a second for nominations. Oh, Ms. McDonald.
I was moving my cursor and my mouse is very sensitive, so apologies.
Sure. Mr. Rhodes?
I'm not making whether I need to make a point of order, just to raise, ask a question and to them.
Herb, I'm having trouble making out. I think it wasn't clear what you asked. I apologize.
All right. And can you hear me now, Mike and everyone else?
Mostly.
That's incredible. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. You're breaking up at times. Right now, you're not breaking up.
I'm not breaking up. So here is something I need to ask and would want a discussion on because it's something that I think is important to raise as to be discussed and then voted on when necessary. It's something that was raised with me in relationship to having and two positions, i.e.
You're breaking up now, Irv. I can't really.
Hell.
I'm sorry.
Oh, am I still there?
You're there inconsistently, is the way I would describe it, Mr. Rhodes. That I hear much of what you're saying, but not all of it.
Let me. All right. Cool. You hear me now?
Yep, and some of the suggestions that come in is If you maybe turn off your video, it may reduce the load on your computer, and we may be able to hear you more.
And also, there are two different connections. One is a 5G and one is a regular, and I'm not sure which one I'm on to do that. I can try turning off the video.
Yep. Well, let's give it a go so I can understand your question.
All right. Question. It is a question of whether we should consider one person serving in elementary and the region. We have two school committees that are elected separately in each town. We have we have two different entities. One is a secondary. One entity represents.
So, Irv, I think I'm capturing what you're saying. I'm actually going to, since the only school committee that's called to order tonight is the regional school committee, I'm in a slightly awkward role as my temporary chair, which I usually don't have to do, that we really can't speak about another committee that has a quorum here but is not called to order. So I apologize that we're not going to be able to speak to that. If there's a question at a joint committee meeting that's called as such, then we could have that conversation, but we can't have conversations about another committee that's not called to order tonight based on open meeting law. So I apologize for that. So, Mr. Demling, did
Mike, I don't understand. If the committee is not called to order,
So, Irv, I'm sorry, it's hard to make it out. The only meeting that was called to order tonight was the Amherst Pelham Regional School Committee meeting, not the Amherst School Committee meeting.
To the region.
Mr. Demling, did you have your hand up or did I see that? I'm sorry if I thought I saw that flash. Irv, it's just very difficult to capture all of what you're saying because you continue to cut in and out. I'm going to make an unusual chair decision because I don't usually have to make them to continue with the planned dialogue because I can't really make out Irv's comments and I can only facilitate this meeting from the regional perspective. So the process works that anyone can make a nomination. Any committee member can make a nomination. It can make it of themselves or of another committee member. And it needs a second. And I think to Mr. Rhodes' point, if he wants to jump in with comments before we have a discussion about that committee member, I think Mr. Rhodes' comments would be well situated if there's a nomination to have that discussion, not from a process perspective from another committee. After there's a chair chosen, we capture as many nominations as people will accept. Just because you're nominated doesn't mean you have to accept the nomination. I think that's an important distinction. The chair will then facilitate the election of the vice chair, and then we can go on to the regular order of the business tonight. Are there questions about the process?
I'm breaking up all over the place.
Don't see any hands up. So at this point, I will accept nominations for chair of the, oh, I'm sorry. Are they questions or nominations? Okay, just want to make sure sorry. So I will accept nominations for chair of the regional school committee. And I think I saw, I think if it's okay to use first names tonight, we'll try. I think I saw Jennifer, and then I saw Jean, and then I saw Allison. So I'll start with Jennifer.
I'd like to nominate Ms. Kenny.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Kenny, is the nomination something that you are wanting to accept at this point?
I
didn't do a second. You have time to think about it. Is there a second to that nomination? My apologies. It's Rusty. It's been a while since there was a town election. I'm Rusty, excuse me. Is there a second to the nomination of Ms. Kenny?
I'll second.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. McDonald. So motion by Jennifer, seconded by Allison, and then I turn to Sarah Bess. Now that you've had the extra 8 seconds to think about it, to see if that's something that you would accept.
While I take this as a huge compliment and I am incredibly flattered to be nominated as chair, I feel like I have to decline because I have made a commitment to the union to be part of that negotiation team. And I pride myself on trying to do things very well when I commit to them. And I don't think I could do both well at the same time. So I appreciate it and thank you very much, but I have to decline the nomination.
Okay. I think the next hand I saw was Jean's.
I nominate Allison McDonald.
Is there a second for that?
Second.
And that's seconded by Jennifer. And Allison, is that a nomination you're willing to accept? Oh,
I did not anticipate that, but yeah. I wish it had gone the other order.
I mean, if you want to say you don't, I think it's a binary question, but I think the answer can wait if you'd like to let the conversation among the committee continue, because that's
I would
put words in your mouth, but that's what I'm sensing from you.
Yeah, I would say. So again, I share sort of. I'm flattered and grateful and honored for the nomination. I've actually enjoyed my role over the year, as difficult as it was. But I would like to take the opportunity to actually nominate Ben as chair. So if there's a second, and if he's willing to accept that, then let's have the conversation.
Second.
Okay, see a second. I've never been this challenged in my couple times being chair of any of my 3 committees. So I don't know if that's auspicious or inauspicious, but we can have that conversation later. So I think there's been a nomination for Mr. Harrington. I've heard a second. I'm going to go straight to Mr. Harrington to see if he accepts that. And then I see Mr. Damling has his hand up. You can see why I'm not often the chair, right? I think that's been in clear as day tonight. Mr. Harrington, is that a nomination you're willing to accept?
Yep, I accept, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Demling, was your hand up for a seconding or a different topic, or, I mean, not topic?
It was up for seconding, but I'll just take the opportunity to say it's very great to hear that Mr. Harrington is open to chairing. I think it would be a great chair.
Thank you, Peter. So I think we've got 3 nominations, 1 accepted, 1 declined, and 1 seems like it's moving in that direction, if I'm understanding Ms. McDonald desires correctly. I keep on mixing I'm really doing an awful job. First names, last names, whole thing. So I can't wait to hot potato this off to somebody. So I'm glad Ben is accepted. But I do, on a more serious note, I do want to see if there are other nominations for chair that anyone would like to make of themselves or others on the committee. I don't see any hands. Is there any discussion anyone would like to, or comments that anyone would like to make?
I think from me, I in the negotiation, I'm in sort of the same boat as Sarah Bess, in that I replaced Hala when she on the negotiating team with the union, and we've met a few times. And one of the things that's really important to the whole groups is continuity, since we've already begun the process and been through the training and discussion. So I'm committed to that. And I did that in the mind that I assumed that I would be no longer chair of this esteemed body, and thought that it was only a temporary burden on my time. So I think for me, I would relish and welcome the opportunity to not be chairing multiple committees and on a negotiating team. It was a lot. And so I would graciously cast my vote for Mr. Harrington, who I think has been, I will just say, been a great, I mean, everybody on this committee is great. And I think any one of us could step up. I think we have a group and a culture within our committee of open sharing of ideas. And no sort of hierarchy of ideas or where good ideas and where work and volunteerism can come from. So I think it's, a great team of equals here. And I think Mr. Harrington has demonstrated that sort of ethos and can carry that on in terms of listening and balancing everybody's ideas and sort of herding us cats. I think he would be well suited for that.
Thank you, Allison. Any other comments before we go to a roll call vote? Okay. So again, I'm just going to go in order that I see the squares. So the motion is for Ben Harrington to become the chair of the Regional School Committee. And I'll start with Jennifer.
Yes.
Thank you. Sarah Bess?
Kenny, aye.
Thank you. And Ben? I think you froze up. I wasn't clear whether you voted or chose to abstain. Either way is fine. I just couldn't hear it.
Yeah, I'm abstaining. Harrington abstaining.
Very good. Thank you. Gene?
Gene, aye.
Thank you. Irv?
Great nomination, and I enthusiastically support Ben's nomination.
Thank you, Irv. Peter?
Demling, aye.
Thank you. Allison?
McDonald, aye.
Thank you. And Steve?
Sullivan, aye.
Very good. Well, I am never been gladder to hand my virtual gavel over to someone, and so I'm happy to help with this, having done it a couple of times. If whatever I can do to help, but the next part of the meeting would be the nominations for vice chair of the regional committee, and Mr. Harrington will facilitate that part of it. So off to you, Ben.
All right. Nice shirt, Mike. Just wanted to say, or Dr. Morris, wanted to say that. Yeah, I'm not. So how do I go about this? I will now take nominees for the vice chair position. Go, Jennifer.
I'm trying again to nominate Ms. Kenny.
And is there a second to the nomination?
Second.
Second. So, Ms. Kenny, what say you?
I did not even think about this. Can I pause like Ms. McDonald did for the chair nomination and see if there are others? Is that acceptable, or do I have to decide right now?
Yeah, that's acceptable. That works.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other nominations? Mr. Stemmel?
I have just a question. What are the duties of the vice chair? Is that what the name is called, vice chair?
I think Mr. Demling is best suited to answer that. Wasn't he the vice chair? Oh, no. Who is the outgoing vice chair?
Ms. Dancer.
Dancer, right, okay. No, Ms. McDonald?
Yeah, Ms. Dancer is the outgoing vice chair, and in our policy, it's sort of like vice president of the United States. It's a role that has very little defined and very little excluded. The only role per policy of a vice chair is to facilitate run the meetings if the chair is not able to or is not present. I think there were a couple times when Ms. Dancer ran the meetings because I had connection issues or I wasn't available. And then it's as much as the vice chair and chair want to make it.
So with the definition clarified here, do we have a second nomination? All right, so are we ready to vote, or do we need to discuss this first? There's only one nominee as far as I can tell.
I think you need to confirm if Ms. Kenny accepts.
Yeah. Ms. Kenny was
that part first then, yes.
Okay, yes, I accept the nomination as vice chair.
All right. With that, I will take a roll call vote. And we'll start. Weird point of order. It's not the most important thing ever, but can we just use first names? Like, I love my family name, but like my first name too. All right, so we'll go. So Jen.
Yes.
Sarah.
I think I'm going to abstain.
Jean.
Jean, yes.
Allison.
Allison, I.
And Peter.
Peter, aye.
And Irv.
Irv, aye.
And Steve.
Steve and I.
So,
You need to vote.
Ben, I as well. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So seven ayes and 1 abstention. And Sarah Bess Kenny is the new vice chair. All right, I didn't fumble that too bad.
Just to assist in the transition, the last election tonight is for secretary, as opposed to some of the elementary districts that some of you sit. The role of secretary more aligns with minute keeping, note taking. It's not typically a member of the committee. It's certainly the committee's decision. My own personal feeling is Ms. Scott has done a fabulous job in that role. And I'd like to recommend on my end that she continue doing that work and that it not get offloaded to a committee member who then would participate and do that role. So this is very different than the secretary of the Amherst and the Pelham school committees, which is a committee member and has a role in Union 26. Just to be really clear, the region is a different one. So that would be my recommendation to the full committee.
And as a point of clarity, we need a nomination for that, correct? So I saw Jean's hand first.
I nominate Maylene Scott as secretary. Heartily.
And Sarah Bess.
Second.
This doesn't require discussion, right? Does it? All right, this is an easy vote. So we'll start off with roll call vote. We'll go with Jen.
Yes.
And Sarah Bess.
Kenny, I.
And Jean.
Jean, aye.
Allison.
Allison, I.
And Peter.
Peter, aye.
Irv. We'll go back to Irv. We'll go to Steve.
Steve and I.
And Irv, are you there? So we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I don't know what we call a non-vote. So 7 and a non-vote, we'll say. All right, perfect. So that part stays the same. I'm hunting down the agenda so that I can actually go through this coherently. All right. So we have reorganize. So we have approval of minutes from.
Can I interrupt with a question?
First, yep, go ahead.
I see that Maylene and Dr. Morris are the host of the meeting. Are we allowing members of the public into the Google Meet or not? And if so, are there like I'm just wondering. I know it's on Amherst Media, but I'm wondering if we're because I think we've started doing that. I'm wondering if members of the public are being allowed into the Google Meet.
Ben, could I respond to that?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Dr. Morris.
Okay. Yes, we are. I think some people like watching it that way. Some people have preferred to watch it on Amherst Media and be slightly more anonymous, I guess, so to speak. But yeah, we both Ms. Scott and I have the ability anytime someone chooses to enter that we accept them in.
Thank you.
No problem.
So has everyone gotten a chance to look over the meeting notes or the minutes from last meeting, the 21st of December? Oh, good. Did anyone have any edits, corrections, adds, anything? Peter?
So just in section under discussion information D, land acknowledgement presentation, Demling commented that he appreciated the work put into this topic. He noted on the topic. I think you just delete that little section. He noted on the topic and the semicolon, and then it's fine. Also, excellent minutes once again, and for any member of the public who did not see the presentation of our new courses, this is a really excellent write-up. So some very helpful minutes there.
Yeah, I've been very happy with the way the minutes have come out since we've added Maylene here. Were there any other? Oh, Gene, go ahead.
Well, this is very unlike me, but I'm wondering, are we supposed to move to accept the minutes first and then have a discussion, or not? And if we are, I'm amazed that I know that, but I would assume that I'm wrong.
Did Peter, did you have your hand up? You have an answer?
Yeah, so it's really convention. My understanding of Robert's rules is you can, as long as it's on an item that's been published on the open meeting agenda, you can discuss it and then do your motion at the end, or you can do your motion at the beginning. It's really.
As I thought, I'm wrong.
I'll take that as a segue to the, does anybody have anything else to add? So I will take a motion if there be one. Yep, Allison.
I move that we approve the minutes of December 21st, 2021, as amended.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, so we'll take a roll call vote again. So we'll go Jennifer.
I'm going to abstain.
Sarah Bess.
Sarah Bess, aye.
Gene.
Keen eye.
Allison.
Allison, aye.
Peter.
Peter Demling, aye.
And Irv.
Abstain.
And Stephen.
Stephen, I.
Passes with 6 ayes and 2 abstentions. All right. So on to the next topic, which is public comments. And we already established that we don't have public comments today, correct? All right. Moving on to the superintendent's update.
Thank you. I'll be very brief, partially because we met right before the break. And since that now to then, there's been a tremendous number of updates, but they fall under the health and safety category, which is an agenda item tonight. So I really just have 2 items. One is that I want to thank the Family Center. They once again did a fabulous gift drive for families who have barriers to purchasing, holiday gifts or presents for students. They had hundreds of gifts come in thanks to the generosity of our staff, as well as community partners. And I got a little glimpse of seeing the pickup from families being able to select, age appropriate gifts, right? Different for if you have an 8-year-old and a 14-year-old. And just, Dr. Guevara and everybody in the Family Center did a fabulous job. So I just want to thank them. And it just was, in an otherwise challenging week, really nice to see the bright human side. And similarly, I want to thank some of the before and after school programs, particularly the after school program at the middle school. They hosted a kids versus adults basketball game on the morning of the 23rd, bright and early, 7:30 in the morning. I got to watch about 15 minutes of the students play. The adults, we had teachers from the middle school, some of the after school staff who are part of that program, and the students. And it was just a really nice way to head into break. And it was just, fabulous to see the kids were into it. As some of you know who have coached or have kids who participate in sports, nothing's more fun than beating adults. And our middle schoolers took things very, very seriously, very appropriately, but very seriously. And it was an additional thing for our staff before their workday to be able to come in, as well as some of the after-school staff who aren't there in the mornings. But it meant a lot to the kids, and it was really fantastic to see. And I think also noteworthy is Principal Sadiq of our high school came down. It was an opportunity to casually meet some of our 8th graders so that he could make some positive relationships before they transitioned to 9th grade. And he does that a lot. And I think it is really noteworthy of these sort of quiet moments where people can build relationships even before they become Amherst Regional High School students. Principal Sharon was there as well as a bunch of other folks. But it was two really nice things that happened before the break. And I think everything else in terms of my updates, I'll do during the health and safety part of the meeting.
And I'll refrain from making any editorial comments about the game. I feel like it was fixed, but no, it was definitely a great event. But did anyone have any comments or questions based on the superintendent's update? So seeing none, I will move on to the chair's update, which will be super brief because I don't have one prepared. So that's awesome. But I do want to welcome our new members and everyone else here. But yep, shout out to Irv and Jen. Welcome. This will be fun. Go ahead, Mr. Rhodes or Irv. Sorry.
Yes, I'm going to sign off and sign back. It's breaking up all over the place, and so I'm going to briefly sign.
Fair enough. It's probably a good idea. All right. So I'll give it a second. Let's see, before I ask for. Actually, we can start. Are there any school committee announcements? Any member announcements? Go, Allison.
The policy subcommittee postponed its December meeting and is meeting tomorrow evening at 6:30. So there were policies that we're reviewing tonight will be, if any feedback will be kicked back to the policy subcommittee tomorrow. And the negotiating subcommittee with APEA has also met many times, and a schedule is set. All of those dates are on in the board docs under meetings for 2022. Meetings have been set through the beginning of February, I believe, is those dates. And that is all.
Thank you. And Jennifer?
Allison partly answered my question, but I guess my question was, what information is generally shared in this agenda item? And I hear that like future meetings of subcommittees is one of them. Like what typically else is shared during, or what is the intention of school committee updates or school committee announcements?
Somebody else want to field that, or you? So we'll go Dr. Morris first, and then Allison.
Sure. I'll just say my experience in the committee has been often two topics come up. One is updates from subcommittees, if that's not an explicitly agenda item later in the meeting, that if there are school members on subcommittees, it's an opportunity to share with the full committee as well as the public the work of those subcommittees and inform that group if it's not, not a big enough item to be its own agenda. And I think the second one, if there are matters of public interest, that a committee member wants to mention, I can think of many times where people thank AEF for certain events that AEF's done, the PGOs, if there's political, governmental state leadership kind of things or advocacy that happens that aren't on an agenda, it does. But, I think I'm glad you raised the topic because it is, and I'll certainly have Allison and Jean jump in, but it is one of the things where we, if it's big enough topic to be its own agenda, then it is a dangerous OML slide, right? That folks have to be aware of. So I don't know if anyone's asked that in my time in the committee to define it, and not that I have all the answers, but I'm glad you raised it. And that's just what I've experienced since I've been working with different committees over the years. But that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Allison, did you still have something to add? Or?
No, I think Mike covered exactly what I was going to say. I think you said sort of state funding or state advocacy opportunities. If there's a public hearing coming up on some education topic, that's usually how the announcements is used, as well as we used to actually say subcommittee updates and school committee announcements. So that could be something that we try.
Thank you. Thank you. And Gene?
Yeah, I would just add, I've always seen it as if somebody from Leverett, Pelham, who is not in Amherst, had something to share from out of town, it would be a time for me or others to say something that related to the committee, or from my town's point of view.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And with that, are there any? Oh, go ahead, Dr. Morris.
I think I'm just still thinking about the OML implications. So I think one thing that distinguishes this from other agenda items is the lack of dialogue, right? That if it's not on the agenda and the committee's in dialogue about it, that's where, and it's an actionable item for the committee, that's where, you know, Ben's job gets complicated in terms of managing that, because there is that OML piece. So I think announcements, it should be taken quite literally in terms of what occurs during this. That's just, again, my 2 cents.
Thank you. And one last call. Do we have any? Nobody has any announcements as far as I see. No raised hands. All right, so we can move on to the safety and health updates.
Sure. So it's going to be, I'm trying to consolidate information so that I don't literally recite the multiple emails that I've sent out to the community in the last 6 days or so. But they've been numerous and they've been lengthy, and I do want to apologize for that. I think in one of them I did say that, but this is a really evolving situation. You know, I think of 6 weeks ago where young kids were getting vaccinated. I know it's a regional meeting, but there's siblings of kids in the region who fit that, as well as some potentially some 7th graders. And there was a lot of optimism of where we were sitting. And I think, you know, we're all in a very different place in Massachusetts and beyond right now because of Omicron, and, you know, seeing 16,000 new cases today and that being an improvement from the last full day of reporting that we had is a pretty amazing, because 2 weeks ago, the most cases we had in a day since the pandemic started was 8,000, right? And so we're having a better day today at 16,000 shows you where we are. Certainly hospitalizations, things like that aren't quite where we were at the beginning, but it's, you know, it's a very challenging situation. And so I think the thing that we've been consistent about is trying to communicate with the community, with parents, staff, caregivers, about the same kinds of things. I mean, that's what I keep coming back to. It's about testing, it's about masking, it's about ventilation, it's about distancing, and it's about vaccination. Right. So we've made adjustments on those, but that's really the same strings we're pulling, right? The same kind of strategies we're using. We're adjusting within those dimensions. And Omicron is not different in that we have the same strategies. We may need to tweak them, and we have, and I'll speak in a second, but those are the same important things for an airborne illness were true 2 months ago. They are now. What's a little more concerning is the transmissibility of Omicron, and we've had to adjust within those categories, within those domains, because of the nature of the illness and the number of people who are testing positive in our Commonwealth, our town, and our community. We're very fortunate when you look at the statewide data and you look at the local data. Our % positive rate is significantly below the statewide data, as well as significantly below neighboring towns. And so I think that's because our community writ large has taken those 5 areas very seriously, not only during the school day, but in people's lives outside the school day. I keep saying it, I'll say it until it's not true, but we still have no evidence of school-based transmission, despite a significant number of cases in the year or so that we've had kids back in buildings, a little more than that if you include the distance learning center. You know, with Omicron, it makes me concerned we won't be able to continue I won't be able to continue to say that, but we've taken additional measures to make schools as safe as they can be in this time. So I'll start with the tests. So we've continued to see an uptick in pooled testing enrollment in our district. We continue to have more participation. It caused a little bit of a glitch this week because we had such a big burst that the high school took a lot longer yesterday morning than it normally did. So it meant Wildwood had to start later and we had to adjust schedules, but everyone got tested who was supposed to get tested. But we've continued to put that out because it's not a one-shot deal that you only had one chance to participate. Before the break, thanks to our partnership with the Amherst Board of Health, every student and every staff member went home with a box of 2 antigen tests. That's unique, and there's a couple communities, Salem being another, Holyoke being another, but it's very unique that we were able to do that. So I really thank that collaboration with the health department. I think it's worth noting at a regional meeting that there was a decision made that it's one community. Yes, it's 4 towns, and there was no barriers put on who received the test. It wasn't only Amherst students in the region who received that. It was all students in the region, whether school choice, Amherst, Pelham, Leverett, or Shutesbury. And so I really thank the Amherst Health Department for having the understanding that, yes, there are town borders, but they don't really matter when kids are sitting next to each other in math class, or who kids socialize with outside of school. Doesn't, those town borders are very porous, right? We also were able to give out 2 tests to every staff member on Sunday. So had a couple volunteers, including State Representative Dom, which was, thank you for coming, Mindy, if you're watching. And Edgardo and Ada and I gave out tests to staff members over at the middle school. Again, most communities were only able to give out 1 test per staff member, but because of our collaboration with Town of Amherst Health Department, we were able to give out 2 tests per staff member. And the good news for the most part is that that worked, right? We did have some staff members who were asymptomatic take those tests, test positive, and be able to not be in school the next day. We had the same thing happen with students. I know I heard directly from families saying, thank you for the test. We had trouble finding them. And, the symptomatic ones are one thing, but it's the relatively asymptomatic, I'll say. Some fully asymptomatic, some people waking up with, a stuffy nose or a scratchy throat, but not what people imagine COVID to feel like, but able to be tested before we came back from school. So, we've continued that. We have started a program today where students or staff members who are close contacts in the school setting can pick up a test, a rapid antigen test, to be able to take home with them and, offer that peace of mind, especially as we're seeing more quote unquote breakthrough infections with Omicron. Formerly, and based on CDC rules, actually, it would only be, and state rules, it would only be unvaccinated folks who would be able to participate in that. But we are extending that, as long as our test supply will last, to vaccinated staff members and students as well. So that's where we are with tests. As it relates to masks, there was an email confirming this today, but we have, since the beginning of the year, actually since students came back, the only masks that we felt like were unacceptable were the sort of gator or bandana style masks. But we've added cloth masks to the list. And that's based on the data that we're seeing about transmissibility of Omicron. It's a recommendation of our health department. And we'll ease students through that. We do have students who will have medical or behavioral disabilities that are exempt from that. I really want to say I have been incredibly impressed with the response. Sometimes when you're in my role, you write emails and some folks will read them and you don't know how big that number is and whether people will do. And we made a recommendation over the break to have not wear cloth masks. And I was at middle school dismissal on Monday and I did a count, and I counted 90%. I counted 100 kids and I saw 10 cloth masks out of the 100 students. There's a couple more I thought were, and then you look closer and the surgical mask was under them, but the cloth mask was bigger. And that might have been, some of the 10 students I saw might have had that as well. And that's not trying to, point out students who were wearing cloth masks. It wasn't a rule at that point, but that's a marked difference from December 23rd when I was out at dismissal at the middle school. And so really appreciate, goes back to our community. We really appreciate everyone's commitment to safety. And so we are making that recommendation into a mandate starting next Monday to give people time to transition to that. And really, we're not anticipating that this necessarily will last all year long. We're hopeful that the surge will, saw data from South Africa today, and they're certainly on the way down from that. We don't know what the future will hold, but at the current time with our current spread in Massachusetts, it's something that we feel like is in the best interest of everyone. Since the beginning, when staff and students came back, we've made KN95 masks accessible for all staff members who would like to wear them. We're in the process, at least for the next couple of weeks, of making them accessible for our students as well. We think by the end of this week, or certainly by the beginning of next week, we'll have supply to be able to do that at the secondary level. And we really, as emphasized in the letter today, the intent is really for families who are interested in their children wearing those masks, or children themselves wearing them, who have access barriers either because they can't find them because they're getting very hard to identify, or because financially there are some challenges with that. It'd be hard to imagine us being able to supply a new mask for every student every day all year long, but this is as much of an emergency situation in terms of state numbers as we've had since students are back in the buildings, and we want to extend. We don't want income to be a barrier to having a high filtration mask, and so we ordered a significant number. I talked to the distributor today. They think they'll be here Thursday or Friday. I know students at the high school, because they wear the same size mask as adults, we've loosened those rules as well. And we know, I talked to Principal Sadiq today, and students have been coming to the office and getting KN95 masks if they choose, but we're increasing our supply, so we'll be able to be much more up in front with that. I did speak to a number of families who are interested in perhaps fundraising if this does look like a longer term need for KN95 masks. When we buy them in bulk, they're about half the price as if you buy them more individually. And they came up with a sliding scale concept, which was really creative, and wrote some language for me. At the current time, we're not going down that road because we feel like we can support students for the next 4 to 6 weeks with the current supply that we ordered. I think if we are looking longer term, I think we will have to have a conversation about what that looks like. But I appreciate families reaching out to me, not only for their own child, but really for the equity needs in our community. So, for all those families who did reach out, thank you, and took the suggestions, and I'm keeping the language they came up with, which I thought was great. And it's in a saved email with a star next to it, because we may come back to that in a couple weeks. And finally, at the middle school, high school, we've started what loosely I'm calling airplane rules during the cafeteria. So if you've flown on a plane during COVID, you'll know that there's very direct instructions that you can demask when you're literally eating or drinking, but the rest of the time, masks should stay on. That was our protocol at the elementary schools, and we've extended that to the middle school and high school and Summit Academy this week as well. So that's the update on masking. Sorry, this is a longer one, but obviously it's the pertinent issue of the moment. Ventilation, we've made it very clear that windows will be open during meal times in the cafeterias. Bring jackets, it'll be chilly, but chilly and better ventilation is the right bargain for us right now. We've also, while our ventilation in those spaces has been boosted by large ventilation or large air purifier, we've actually ordered an additional air purifier, large one, for the middle school and high school to further boost the ventilation in those spaces. And so when they come in, we'll put those in. It's not that there was an issue with ventilation. It's just given that students are demasking at certain points, we want to increase it beyond even the recommended levels because that is such an area where we have concerns about. Distancing, we're continuing to maintain distancing, but I think some of the protocols that we've shifted are going virtual for adult meetings. And I know there's some folks who feel like, well, how do you expect kids to be in school if adults are meeting virtually? And for me, it's all these things are to keep schools running. We know the value of in-person schooling for kids, and that's our goal. And anything that gets in the way of that goal, we're going to take very conservative measures on. So it's not that individual teachers can't meet, but we're talking about faculty meetings, large group meetings, even moderate sized meetings. If there's a way to do it virtually, we're encouraging and in some cases mandating that people do those virtually because our intentional focus is in-person learning for students and not canceling school. And again, any barrier to that, we're taking very aggressively action towards. We've also limited athletic event attendance to just direct family members. And that's true of both our home and visiting teams. Obviously, masking is required, consistent with the rules that I mentioned earlier. But it is one of these decisions. I really want to compliment Athletic Director Stewart, who did whatever. She's a direct report to me, and what you'd want a direct report to do is talk about the value of having camaraderie and having colleagues and peers come and cheer on their friends. And so we had a meeting with the Amherst Health Department who. And actually, I had a meeting with the neighboring district who did see spread at athletic events in the community. And so we're trying to do everything so that our student athletes can continue to participate. Our parents, guardians, caregivers can continue to see their children, because I know families feel a little closed off from their children's experience because of our COVID rules. And we feel like we can do that very safely. It's about a 10% capacity if we're just having direct family members attend, and we can distance and mask and feel very comfortable in a well-ventilated gym or other spaces to do that. But there is real pain in that, because there is something that is magical. Those of you who've been to in any experience to cheer on a friend, a colleague, or to be on the other end of that and hearing those cheers. But at this point, it's just not where we are. We want to just make sure we're able to offer sports. I know Boston, Springfield, a couple districts have called off sports for a couple weeks, and that's our last resort because we know how meaningful it is to our students. Finally, we have a vaccine clinic tomorrow. Plug that there's still some vacancies. It's I got the update. We have, I think, 157 people signed up for shots, and there's, I think, 60 still open. First shots, boosters. People get first shots. They'll come back on the 26th of January for the second shots and more booster opportunities. It's right after school, 3 to 6 at Amherst Regional High School, although I think the 3 to 4:40 slots are sold out, quote unquote. And so it's the same organization that's done a couple more. This is our 13th and 14th clinics we've done since the pandemic started, including all of our schools in the 3 districts, I should say. It's open to anyone in the community. So if you're a community member, right, our schools are safer because our community is safer. There's no difference between those, right? They affect each other. And so if anyone has trouble, the links on our web, has been sent out, but, please, morrism@harps.org, please send me an email. I'll make sure I do my best to get folks set up. I know the Family Center has also reached out to folks for whom email and electronic sign up has been more of a challenge in the past. But that's tomorrow. I think the slightly awkward timing is it seems likely that tomorrow afternoon, simultaneous to the clinic, is that boosters will likely be weighed in on by the CDC, and seems likely that they will be approved for the 12 to 15-year-old group, but not in time for our clinic tomorrow. But there is Town of Amherst has a clinic every Thursday afternoon from 3 to 6. The way it works in Massachusetts is that the sign-off goes from the CDC, and then the state DPH has to sign off as well. That usually happens the morning after the CDC director has signed off on it. So it certainly is possible by Thursday morning or Thursday afternoon that 12 to 15-year-olds will be eligible for a booster, and there may be an opportunity right in town that afternoon for folks who are interested. I think that is the 5 areas: test, mask, ventilation, distancing, vaccination. Yes, I think that is my health and safety update, but I imagine there may be some questions that folks have.
All right, I saw Jen's hand first, and then Jean, and then we'll take Allison.
Thanks. Mike, earlier you said there was an uptick in participation in pool testing, which is fantastic. Can you give us a sense of like what percentage of students are participating?
I think we're getting over 50%. When we first started, we were about a third. And I can get that breakdown perhaps for the next meeting because it varies by school. Anecdotally, since I work at the middle school and the middle school has pool testing, I've seen the line extend from at the beginning when they were starting. They do it right outside the nurse's office, and it wouldn't really make it much beyond the office. And now it's getting closer to my office when the students first line up, and maybe because they're distancing better, but there's also more of them. So, but that's something I'm going to write a note that I can try to get an update on pool testing participation by school. Thank you. It's a great question.
Thanks.
And Jean?
Yeah, I was wondering, I assume there's still no mask requirement outdoors?
Yep, our health director has indicated that she's not seeing evidence from the contact tracing of transmission outdoors. I think it'd be different if we were having outdoor concerts with 5,000 people wall to wall. I mean, there has been, pretty famously 2 weeks ago in Puerto Rico, there was a kind of super spreader event that was like that. Our outdoor, is not seeing static people for hours on end, certainly not in winter. People sitting or standing in the same place. So it is something we talk about frequently, but at this point, based on the contact tracing and the recommendation of public health, we're not seeing evidence of concern that way. So I will tell you that some students, you do see students and staff members, some having a mask on outside, some not, but the public health guidance hasn't changed on that one. If it does, then we'll change our guidance.
Thanks.
And Allison.
I had the same question about participation rates, so thank you. And I also had a question. I actually have 2 other questions. One is having a high schooler, myself, who's doing the pool testing. Just a question about the staffing of that, because he reported that seemed to be a lot less, or they had less staffing on Monday than they normally do, and that some kids were turned away. So I just, have we, I know we're not running that it's the state contracted team. So I'm just curious as to, are they having issues with their staffing, and is it getting back? And then my second question was about remote learning option. So, because you mentioned about closing schools, if we had to close for a day or two, is there a remote learning option? My understanding is that there isn't, but I've had community members ask me about that. And so I think it would just be good to get that clarified.
Yep. So the first question, there were some everyone's having staffing issues in Massachusetts, so they're no different than us or anyone else. So they did have some staffing issues. The other challenge is that their recommendation that they're having with the number of positive tests occurring in Massachusetts is the pools are getting smaller. So formerly the pools would be in groups of like 8 to 10, and now they're recommending pools of 3. And the idea is that they're testing lots of schools. This isn't particular. I just want to be clear. It's not specific to our district. They're getting so many positive tests that like feels like so many pools are testing positive, and then you have to buy next 8 to 10 people. And then, it's what worked really well pre-Omicron is not working well in terms of pool now. So the other challenge is that the pools, there's more pools, and that actually takes more time for them to do, and the staffing issue. So they were slated to be there. Typically, they're at the high school for about, they do the staff first, but an hour and a half, hour 45, and they were there for 3.5 hours on Monday. So they are aware of those challenges and trying to meet them. But I think the staffing issues that folks read about in the newspapers every day are, I don't know an organization in Massachusetts that's not being affected by staffing challenges right now. And the second question is, any transition to remote learning would need to be approved by DESE. I think the governor was incredibly explicit. I'm not saying I support or don't support his comment, but incredibly explicit yesterday in Salem that he considers the only thing that should count to time on learning for school is in-person learning. And they have been very cagey with allowing for remote options, and it meant when schools have closed, because there have been some that have closed, it closes as a snow day model. So the day gets made up later in the year as opposed to changing to remote.
Thank you. And Peter.
Yeah, so I really appreciate the additional measures that you've taken in the last several weeks and in the turn of the year to proactively respond to the conditions. I think when we first passed our policies, I think it was last spring, or maybe a year before that. The pandemic time is an accordion. We talked about that we didn't want to say, our school committee didn't want a specific mask policy, yay or nay, or, to hardwire it in, that we wanted to give you that responsiveness. And we've seen districts across the state really struggle with that, not just in terms of, political controversy at, public comment at meetings, but just in terms of how to respond fast enough and not violate policy. So I really appreciate those proactive measures. And we can't say enough about the job that our facilities and maintenance staff and our students and staff and families are doing in terms of adhering to the protocols that's keeping this, at the level that it's at, right? There's certain things we can control and certain things we can't control. And the very high vaccination rate in our community and in our staff and in our students, and the adherence to protocols of keeping yourself home when you're sick is really amazing. So, it takes a village to keep kids in school in person. So which then brings me to my question. So, I hate to think about doomsday scenarios, and I understand what you mean about the state's indication about their adherence to in-person learning. But in terms of staffing, like what I know it's only been 2 days of the new year. What's most critical to you? What are you most worried about? I can think of like transportation. Can think about subs, and are we at a point where it's going to get very difficult to keep the schools open in a particular area? And then has DESE indicated to you? I know they talk to superintendents or email them what the actual backup plan is. If they're not going to be approving remote, and they're going to give you time to prepare to do something. You know, what's the fallback, or are they just telling us there is no fallback option and hunker down?
So on the second question, the fallback option is to call DESE. I mean, quite literal. Someone asked that on a conference call, and the response was, please call Anne Marie. Anne Marie's their COVID lead on this. So I don't think, I haven't heard anything that indicates that there's a fallback option other than canceling school and making up days later in the year. You know, that could change certainly, but at this point, I've not heard that. And to your question, the staffing, so we had an administrative meeting, leadership meeting right before the break. And I think at that point we had 77 days of school. And my comment to our team was, every day I wake up and kids get on a bus, and if they can get to the school and have, you know, high quality adults working with them, I feel like that's a win this year. That every day it's a challenge. It's more of a challenge right now. And so I'm worried in every area. I'm worried about transportation. I'm worried about custodial. You just mentioned how important it is in COVID times for that. I worry about having teachers and staff for our ELL students, special ed students, and all students. So we've built in contingency plans if our staffing gets low enough of how we might respond to it. So at the secondary level, we might have, if there's a couple classes where we don't have coverage, we might have them join in an auditorium, like a larger group space where kids can be distanced and be able to catch up on work on Chromebooks and things like that. So we have our own sort of internal, what we would do if scenario tree. And, you know, we hope that those scenarios don't come out. We hope that we don't have to do them. And if we hope that they're good enough, right? At some point, you may get to a different place on them. So it is something that every morning, you know, I'm waiting for the text from Rupert Roy Clark, our facilities director, or Randy, our transportation coordinator, or principals. And, you know, I really want to compliment the principals because they are, them and the kind of administrative assistants, every morning they're problem solving who can go where to make sure kids are covered and kids can be learning. And it's a challenging task, and it's a daily task. And it's been a daily task. You know, it's a challenge throughout the year, but particularly in the last 3 weeks. The beginning of school was really hard that way. And then the last 3 weeks have been particularly challenging that way. And so there's a lot of moving pieces, and our staff have been outstanding in terms of jumping into situations. You need class coverage. Yeah, I'll jump in. And it's a daily email that I see from middle school and high school about just making sure people can cover. And, you know, I'm deeply appreciative of our staff for the way they entered back school yesterday. It was not easy. It was great to see a lot of them on Sunday when we were handing out the tests. And, you know, I think it was a nice moment where someone shared with me, you know, we had some hard challenges last year, but because we had some of those challenges, we're in a much better place. You know, for some people, this was the first time they had available KN95 masks, and we've had made them available for staff since students came back, and ventilation, all those pieces that not everyone took as seriously as we did. And I think because of that, not that it's perfect, I don't want to be Pollyannish, but we're able to partner with staff on health and safety practices. And, you know, I think of other communities, I've gotten incredibly positive responses for the emails in the last week, which are restrictive, right? Those of you who haven't worn a K95 or KF94 mask all day, it's not fun. It's not pleasant. And, you know, we really have gotten incredible support, both from staff on that matter, but also from our community, right? There's communities within an hour of here where there are protests about mask mandates. And we're like up in the game on like, well, it's not just mask mandate. We need to wear a certain kind of mask and all that. And so I really feel fortunate. I meant what I said in the email the other day. I really feel fortunate I'm working here where people are so serious about health and safety. And it's not taken a lot of convincing for people to up their game given the change in the current context. Feel really lucky.
Are there any other questions or comments for Superintendent Morris? All right, then we will roll into pool testing for extracurriculars.
So I can introduce this topic if that's okay. And you can call me Mike if we're going by first names. Let's do it, right? And so, so this is a topic that a couple neighboring communities have had, that they require pool testing for students who are involved in extracurricular activities like dramatic performances or athletic events. I'm not coming. This came from a committee member as a future topic. So I'm just really bringing it to the committee to see if the committee wants to take action on it. I mean, we're in a bit of a funny place that our 16 to 18-year-olds, I think, are the only district in Massachusetts that does have a vaccine mandate. And that probably will extend to 12 to 15-year-olds and not so long, because Pfizer's applied for that to be receive their vaccine for 12 to 15-year-olds to receive full FDA approval. So, you know, because someone was saying, well, you know, interesting, Amherst hasn't done this when other communities have, but, you know, we've taken other measures that other communities haven't. So I just wanted to bring the topic to you because it's come to me. I'm not necessarily coming to you with a recommendation on it, but at least to raise the topic and see if the committee is interested in you know, looking at other districts' policies, or if the committee feels like our current practices are, you know, satisfactory. So I'm really just bringing it to the committee for your discussion more than making a recommendation tonight.
And so the idea here would be that, like, the basketball team would be a pool, the theater group would be a pool, band, etc. That's the idea. Is that where they're going?
They wouldn't necessarily need to be a pool together. It would just be that in order to participate in after-school activities, you'd have to participate in the district's pool testing. So the idea, I think, is that since after-school activities tend to be slightly less structured in some cases than during the school day, where, you know, there's bells and there's, you know, chairs and tables and desks, that after-school activities, we don't have to, you know, we can't require pool testing for every student. It's our Commonwealth has said it's not consistent with the law, but since extracurriculars are not a required part of what we have to offer students, you can put additional requirements on participation. You know, I think this came up earlier in the year, just to be really transparent. And I think I said at that time, you know, I didn't love the idea of pointing out extracurriculars over, you know, other things. Like there's a piece of me that struggles with that, but I also understand that we're in a different world than we were in September. So it's something I'm struggling with. You know, I think most of you who have worked with me a while know I usually do come with recommendations, sometimes too specific recommendations. I've gotten that feedback, and tonight I'm really just coming that this is a concept that other school committees have taken on, and then landed one way or the other. And since it's come up to me, I just wanted to bring it up to the committee to see if it's something that folks wanted to do. It's not something I would recommend taking action on tonight, because I think it hasn't been discussed by the committee, and based on policy, in most typical moments, you know, you'd have some discussion and see if a policy, sending it to the policy subcommittee perhaps to work on, would be the next step from my vantage point. But that's really, I think at this point, I'll just turn over the committee, see if you have thoughts.
All right. And I thought I saw a hand prior to the other two. And also, I'm curious to hear what a high school student would think about this. So we'll start with Ruby.
I have like a clarifying question. So I'm in band and chorale, but those don't meet after school. So would I not have to be pool tested if I was in that? Like that wouldn't count as an extracurricular, or would that count as an extracurricular?
So since those are academic courses, they would not apply to that. It really is things that occur beyond the typical school day, like 9 to 3:45 or whatever the hours are. Anything that is a course that's offered at the high school that occurs during the school day can't have that additional requirement attached to it. Does that help, Ruby?
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's hard because it doesn't seem like we have enough capacity. Like if they're there for 3.5 hours testing people, it's unclear if we have enough capacity to test. Like the musical has 100 students in it. Like I'm involved with that, and that's my thing. And we have sport, which is like what, 100-ish. So my question is like, do we even have the capacity to say we need to test all extracurriculars? Like I feel like that needs to be addressed before we even discuss making that action. So
That's a solid point. I'll go Jean and then Jen.
Yeah, my thought in general, at least I think it's my thought, is that you know, with Omicron, with this new variant, vaccines are obviously only so effective. I mean, a lot of people are getting it and transmitting it who are vaccinated. So I see pool testing as probably more beneficial. I would probably favor pool testing for these sort of less structured after school activities, extracurricular, where people are really interacting in, unpredictable ways. Probably there's a lot of fairly close contact. And I don't see the vaccine as being really predictive of how much transference there'll be. And maybe pool testing would be a good idea. Just a quick thought.
Thank you. And Jen.
Yeah, I'm in favor of researching and discussing this topic more. I think the committee should. I think if Mike can do some more research and find out other policies from other school districts, I think the committee should discuss it more. As Jean said, and from what I've read about Omicron, there are going to be more breakthrough cases. There'll be more cases where vaccinated people, test positive. I think I read today that fully vaccinated people, the vaccine is 35% effective for 2-dose vaccinated people and up to 75% for boosted people, which is still great, but it's way lower than like the 95 to 99% that we were seeing with the original and with the Delta variant. So I know we're not making a decision tonight, but I'm in favor of discussing it more, researching and discussing it more.
And we'll go Peter.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree that it's worthwhile to discuss again. In terms of the additional information that I think would be helpful for us to discuss would be what if any recommendations the town of Amherst health director has, the town that our regional schools are in, not because it's from Amherst. Because that's been one of the big drivers here is what the public health officials have said. I guess my initial reaction to this as a requirement for these activities en masse, right? The diversity of activities that interact in proximity in much different ways, is that I'm not immediately inclined to require it because it is an opt-in activity. Right, it's like you are making the choice to participate in a sport or theater or what have you. Which is not in the same way as having your required education courses. It feels like it's if to have a specific policy, right, that the school committee writes and says, for these activities, then pool testing is required. It feels like it's straying from general policy guideline to implementation detail. And the thing that I've really liked about what we've done so far with COVID safety protocols is that we've empowered the superintendent at a very high level to respond to changing conditions, right? And not sort of tie his hands about what has to happen, what not has to happen. It's like, so for example, had we passed a very specific mask mandate, superintendent could not have adhered to our policy without calling emergency meetings of the school committee in the last few weeks. And similar thing to what we did with the in-person policy, right? We didn't pass a policy saying we have to have in-person school under this metric or whatever. We empowered the superintendent to respond to changing conditions and implement the appropriate health measures and we said in the motion in direct consultation with local public health officials, right? And I like that from a school committee oversight point of view as well, because we can always revisit the topic if we ever felt like the superintendent went off the rails, we could pass a policy. But I can imagine the relative benefit of requiring that level of a logistical operation being different now than it might be even a month from now, right? Or a couple months, depending on how Omicron and whatever future variants rise and fall. So yeah, I guess in full circle, I no harm in discussing in the future, but I certainly would want to hear what the current thinking is from the local public health officials.
And we'll go Allison and then Irv.
Yeah, I would say that it's definitely worth talking about and looking at sort of what other districts have done, and sort of look at some of those model policies and how they're doing that. I share the concern about the capacity for testing, as well as I'm not sure there may be a good proportion of students in participating in extracurriculars who are already participating in the pool testing. So I think that's one of the things that I don't know if we can find that information out, or that if that data is available, but it'd be worth understanding that. I think the other thing for me that I think about is, as Peter brought up about sort of this is an opt-in, and students are choosing to participate in these. They tend to also be very highly motivated to continue participating in these. And I mention that because they also all know that if one of them gets COVID or the other team gets COVID, their opportunity to participate in that gets shut down temporarily. So they're very familiar with that, and so that motivation to continue to be able to play, to continue to be able to perform or participate in that extracurricular is highly motivating in terms of making sure that they're doing all that they can to prevent the spread. So I'm not sure what the incremental benefit to in-school spread and community spread would be for adding this extra layer, given all the other layers that we have in place. And I guess the question that just the data right now, we haven't seen. You mentioned, Mike, that we still haven't seen in-school spread. That may change in the coming weeks, but I also wonder, by the time we get a policy, are we going to be past the hump of an Omicron surge anyway? So, I think we need to keep tracking and understanding the extent to in-school spread, and which presumably that includes buses and extracurriculars and sports, not just in the classroom. So that's a piece of data that I would want to have as we look at some other model policies to understand what our current situation is, and do we feel that we need an extra layer of protection for our school community that this kind of pool testing requirement might provide.
Mike.
So maybe I can make a recommendation that we'll collect the pool testing information. It's going to be hard to break it down by student athletes because that changes every season, and extracurriculars also change by the season. So that's a little tricky, but at least if we get the aggregate number, we'll have a sense of what it looks like. My recommendation for the committee to consider, given that there seems like there's interest in at least exploring it further, would be to ask the policy subcommittee, which I know has busy in other policies, but my recommendation would be for someone to, on a Mass School Committee listserv, to just put out an open question if anyone's passed the policy. My experience is when it comes to policy matters, that listserv is really helpful for people very quickly saying, well, Belchertown did this, Hadley did this, Brockton did this, Boston did this, and maybe bring that to a policy subcommittee, and then they could bring it back to the full committee. But just from a policy perspective, it seems like that would be the logical next place for this topic to go to, since it seems like there's interest in exploring it further and understanding more. I can gather the data, but I think on the policy side, that listserv or getting in touch with MASC directly, I'm sure they have lots of accumulated policies on this topic. I don't know how that suggestion feels to people, members of the committee.
Thank you. And Irv?
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. The other thing is, and following up with Allison noted, for teams, it's like self-preservation. If too many of your members come down ill, you can't participate, and you get knocked out of competition. The other thing to note is that team players or any member of a team who comes down with COVID obviously is roaming around the school. So you do have that potential for community transmission, which would be something to keep very, very close track of. I would be in favor of being cautious about this and would like to follow Mike's lead in terms of looking at other data, other schools' practices, etc. But also bearing in mind as the winter sports season heats up and more competitions happen and practices happen, that we are likely to see an uptick in those cases.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to add that I definitely agree that I'd like to see a lot more data on this, but particularly one data point that I'd like to see is like, is there any trend that kind of leads us towards like efficacy within other folks' policies? Like, because if we don't have the capacity and it doesn't seem like it's a super effective approach, I'd be less inclined to even entertain it as a policy. But that definitely something worth digging down into. And we'll take Allison again.
Sorry, I'm just responding for the policy subcommittee. So the agenda for tomorrow is posted, but the official January meeting is later in a couple weeks, so we can collect, get those model policies and see if there's other information that then the policy subcommittee can look at that later in January.
Okay. And Mike.
Yeah, I think talking the other thing that I can offer is I think Ben's point's a really good one, that if the policy subcommittee does find districts that have model policies, I'm happy to connect with the superintendent on the functional implications of them, much like Ruby talked about. Is there capacity? Has that been a challenge? But also to Ben's point, what is the efficacy? Has it mattered? Did it work? Are you glad that policy got passed? So sort of as those policies are gathered, just please keep me in the loop, and I'm happy to contact the direct superintendents in those districts and hear a bit more about what does the implementation actually look like and, on the ground.
And Sarah Bess. You're a little bit muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, so if we're going to look at if there are other schools that have policy around pooled testing, maybe we should also look to see if they have vaccination policy, because that might make a difference as to how their pooled testing is working and why they did it. If they do or don't have the COVID vaccine as one of their mandatory vaccines.
Thank you. And Mike, go ahead.
Sorry, the last point is I think the other thing to think about, and this isn't a yay or nay, we should or shouldn't do it, is we live in, I talked about Fortunate before, having the UMass testing facility so close. It's sort of amazing when you look at I'm sure many of you have seen the images of testing locations in our state and 3-4 hour waits last week. And, the capacity of folks to get tested here is a lot higher. So I just think that's when we think about comparing communities, there's a lot of factors to consider in that because we're really lucky with where we're situated at the moment. And again, that's not a reason to do it or not to do a policy, but I think to Sarah Bess's point, understanding the differences between communities and how those implications would work here is an additional lens that we should consider. Demographics as well.
Nice. Was there anyone else who wanted to chime in? Anyone else who hasn't spoken? All right, so we will wrap this and move on to Jen. There you go.
I actually, it's not about that. It's about a different topic. So I just wanted to wait till everyone finished. The mention of the policy subcommittee reminded me that as part of reorganizing, were we supposed to, or are we going to talk about membership on subcommittees and other roles like signing the warrants, or is that going to happen at another time?
Further down the agenda. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, Mr. Harrington has been the chair for all of hour and a half, but that was originally slated for the next school committee meeting in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
We thought it would just. I was planning this agenda with Ms. McDonald, candidly, with Allison, excuse me. And we thought it'd be good for the committee members, new committee members, to be able to have a meeting to have the conversations and to do a little thinking based on who's chair. And we didn't know how that was going to shake out. So when people jumped in and asked questions about subcommittee, they had a little more thought time than rushing right into it in the first meeting.
That's kind of what I was thinking, is we would address that during future agenda planning there. So with no more comments, questions regarding the, all right, so we will move on to, I'm just gonna go with Doug's slaughter on this one for the FY23 budget presentation.
Thank you, Ben. Mike, I can't present, so if you could present the slides, that would be great.
I will, since we've had the public in meetings, the auto let everyone present feature is turned off for protection against Zoom bombing. But now that I know you're looking to present, Maylene or I, and I'm happy to do it because Maylene's taking notes, can give you access to share your screen. And at this point, you should be able to do it.
Yep. So just give me a moment to switch to that. Why is it? Okay. Hold on. I'm sorry for the delay. I'm having a little difficulty having it find the window. There it is. I had to make it more active. So hopefully I'm now sharing to you, and I'll adjust a little bit. Let me know if, as I go through, if things are not of a sufficient size for you to see. Some things in the presentation are fairly small. Hopefully I had a chance to look at this a little bit in advance of the meeting. Excuse me. So I'll just take you through where we are in the budget at the present time. And so my cursor in the right place. So I'll start first with the expense side of the budget. I'm going to make this just a little larger and see if that helps make it a little easier to see. For those of you that are new to this, and please don't hesitate to sort of jump in. I can't see everyone's face, and so if you have a question, if something's not clear, feel free to sort of jump in and ask a question and get things clarified. I don't want to leave people behind. If I'm speaking too quickly or gloss over something that you're interested in, please interrupt and ask. And that's true for everyone, not just the new members. So what we have here is a level services budget. Just as a reminder, level services is taking essentially what we've got on the ground in the buildings at present and rolling them forward into next year and taking into account steps and adjustments for contractual obligations that we have. We do make projections as to what we think will happen relative to our other expenses, and then we sort of tally that up and see how that compares to what our revenues look like. And so starting here with the expense side of the equation, at the very top you'll see, and the column we're looking at is the one that says draft at the top, but it says 23 projected. These are the actual numbers in this column here, which will be the ones that are currently estimates for our budget. And starting at the top, the first three lines there in that one section is payroll accounts. The thing I will note about those numbers, they are in taking into account obligated contractual steps if people are not at the top step. We have 6 union contracts, 5 of which are either in negotiation or going to be in negotiation, and so are not settled yet for the coming fiscal year. And so those kinds of cost of living for adjustments, COLA as it's termed, for the coming year are not included in that set of numbers that you're seeing there in the first 3. And so we will make a estimate of what we think the negotiations will turn out to be, and we have those in under the line that says control accounts near the bottom that has part of that as the number there. That's our estimate as we go through our negotiation process with our unions. And so I just want to make sure that as you see that, and for most of the payroll salaries, you'll see a 1.4% increase. That's a fairly modest amount of increase. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is because there's no change from the current year as far as cost of living adjustments. So anybody that's at the top step is at the top step, again, the same number. The other thing that I will point out in that number, which is a little difficult to see, is that when we apply school choice revenues, we apply it in the salary area for our teaching staff particularly, and so that reduces that projection by the amount that we use for school choice. So in the coming year, we're suggesting the use of $750,000 worth of school choice to reduce that expense of salaries. That's a little larger than in the current year. The current year, we took a fairly conservative approach, less than $500,000. We tend to try to use an amount that preserves the balance and stays in keeping with the number of kids we have that are coming into our district and the revenues that we generate through school choice. But we have some latitude with that. Those revenues, we hold them and utilize them and keep a certain amount reserved into a revolving fund in order to smooth out either peaks or valleys in enrollment and in revenue relative to that. And so by applying a larger amount of school choice, we don't want to hold too much sort of cash on hand. It doesn't do us any good if it's just sitting in the bank. And so we have an opportunity to use a little bit more, about $250,000 more than the current year, which helps reduce that projected salary line a little more than is typical for this year. So I just want to point that out as a significant advantage in the current year, and as we go into subsequent years, we'll have to sort of manage those use of revenues for that purpose. As we go through as far as the contracts and the substitutes, we've held them fairly steady under the contracts. That's typically, we're paying people again, sort of, at their usual rates. It's for activities that are outside their regular working day. So other activities that they perform for us, after school activities, summer activities, that sort of thing is what we see in there. I did take a fairly extensive look at all of the expense lines. If there were small places where I thought our historical averages could be adjusted, I did, whether it be up or down. In this case, it's ever so slightly down for those contracted services. And so it's at the same time as we think about negotiating contracts with our employees, that will change that number if we resolve contracts and have new cost of living increases and adjustments relative to that. So it's a little atypical to have a decrease in that line, but I think it's mostly an artifact of not having the contracts negotiated at the moment. And that's not a good or bad thing. I don't want to imply that it's a bad thing. It's just where we are. And then some review of some particular lines and tightening those a little bit. As we head into the expense accounts.
Excuse me, Doug.
Yes.
Hi, I have two questions.
Mm-hmm.
First, I want to clarify, you said that $750,000 in choice has been applied to the salary line, so that $17.1 million for fiscal 23 is actually $750,000 higher. You've subtracted it. Am I understanding that correctly?
We've subtracted it. So it's one of those sort of upside down sort of things you have to think about. So we've got revenue, which we then reduce in expense. So our expense that we're expecting to have is reduced by that amount of revenue, because we're charging it to that revenue fund and that revolving fund instead of charging it to our appropriated lines and sort of our tax dollars that we get and that sort of thing. And
the same for the past years, like it's apples to apples, right? Comparison.
Right. I mean, each year we typically use a little different amount each year. And so for the budget for fiscal 22, that $16,942,990 is actually just under $500,000 lower, because we used about $500,000 worth of school choice.
Okay.
If we were to go further back through the actuals, it depends on the year as to what, there's what we budgeted and then what we actually end up applying typically.
Right. Okay. And then along those lines, is it typical to compare the previous fiscal year to compare it to the budget as opposed to the actual of the previous fiscal year? Like all the past years are actual except for 22, which is the budget, not the actual. Is that typical?
That is typical. And the reason why is we're only halfway through the current year. So if we put in actuals, they'd be half the size they should be. So it's the best number we've got at the moment. But we do put in the actuals to sort of show the things actually result in what we really did spend, as opposed to what we thought we were going to spend, which is the best number we have at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Peter, you had a question?
I just wanted to ask the chair if we can maybe, since this is our first meeting all together with our new committee, just kind of establish how we get recognized to speak and then speak. I appreciate Doug's inviting people to interrupt him. And I have a bunch of questions that I can interrupt him with, but I just, for future meetings, we either have raised our hand or used the icon, or, I mean, maybe it's a little confused now that we are using Google Meet with the raised hand icon thing, but, just so that we can establish a protocol of order of speakers, and if you have multiple questions, how that sequence, that would be helpful, I think.
Yep. So what I've experienced in the past is that we would wait until after the presentation we would table the questions until after the presentation, and then also there is the point of order that you need to be recognized by the chair in order to ask said question. I just wanted to throw that out there.
I'm sorry if I've caused trouble by virtue of being overly suggestive in what and how people should behave, but sorry.
No, just minor growing pains here. That's all.
Yeah,
figuring it out.
What I don't want is for folks to be sort of stuck in a place of misunderstanding or confusion about something and something we could resolve quickly. But I think the rest of what I have to say on this slide is going to go pretty quickly and be fairly straightforward. And so, as you look through the different other expense areas outside of salary, what we have here is our estimates for what we think those different areas of the budget are going to cost us in the coming year. Again, there's some small reductions in some areas, some increases in some areas. There's still some unknowns, to be quite honest. I think there are 3 areas in particular that I think have a large amount of unknown to them still. One is special education expenses, and it's not because we don't have some idea of it. It's just the more time I have, the more time I'm going to refine that number with our student services director and her staff as to what they think that looks like. Transportation is another one. In the transportation area, we have both. We have a split system where we have some of the transportation costs are held wholly within our staff. But we also contract out part of that, and our contract has a very particular adjustment for cost of living. We won't have the official number that increases the contract until later this month. Inflation is going to be a factor in that number. As you can see from the number that's showing there, it's up about 8.9% as an estimate. That will probably remain true, but it will get refined a bit more. We use Northeast Regional CPI over the last 12 months, and the December numbers have not come out yet. But I can tell you that through the 11 months preceding, so January of 21 to November of 21, the increase was about 4.25%. It will likely go to about 4.5%. So that number is likely to go up a little bit more. Another area that has a lot of unknown in it at this moment is our insurance, our risk and benefits line. So certain aspects of our risk and benefits have gone up. Just property insurance has gone up pretty considerably. But the big number in there is our health insurance. That's probably it's more than half or around half of that total $7 million. Right now we're estimating about a 4% increase. That's in conversation with Town of Amherst finance director and his thoughts and his conversations with our insurance provider. We'll get a much more firm number later this month. I think officially it might be February 1st, but I think usually when the Mass Municipal Association meets in late January, the Amherst town manager has a pretty good relationship with our provider, and we'll press for a little more detail at that point. It's likely that number won't be 4%, but we want to be cautious with our estimates, and so that will hopefully reduce that expense a little bit for us. So those 3 areas are 3 that are pretty significantly still in flux as we go through the coming weeks. And then I think that there are other aspects. As I said before, we have in our control accounts some estimates for some things. One of which is what we think and how we think the negotiations will proceed for the coming year. We want to be good faith partners in negotiating those contracts, and so I'll leave it as a sort of vague description of that. But nonetheless, we know that we'll have those conversations with our unions over the ensuing weeks and months, and try to resolve those contracts in a fair and reasonable way. And then that will be an impact on our budget. In we have hopefully captured that in a pretty reasonable way. There are a couple of areas that are notably larger than in past in the current year. One of which is information systems. Last year we had a bit of say influx. We leveraged some resources from the federal government to help us buy more technology devices to help us do remote learning, and as a result, we reduced the need in that area, or reduced the expense in that area by $50,000. We're restoring that technology purchasing power essentially back to that information systems department. So that's why that $50,000 increase on that line is there. We've also noticed in reviewing the budget in our central administration that our regular year-over-year costs for legal expenses have risen and remain at a higher level, and so we've adjusted the budget to account for that as well. So those are not likely to change, but I did mention the three areas that were most in need of adjustment and refinement as we go through the month of January. And so I think the good news is that the overall increase at this point, as we're projecting, is about 4%, which is really pretty modest. And I think that excuse me, I think that that's a sort of manageable increase, and I think we'll be able to be able to move through the rest of our budgeting process with a fairly positive and perhaps less painful process than we've had in past years when we've had to make pretty significant cuts. And so I think I'll move on to the next slide, which talks about our revenues. And I'm going to shrink this, I think, just to, well, I'll scroll a little bit, I think. So if you haven't seen this slide before, I'm sorry. I'll apologize in the beginning of this because it's a fairly busy slide. And so the other side of the equation that we have relative to our budget is the resources that come into play and how we fund our budget. And so at the bottom of the last slide, the overall expense that we were expecting to need to cover is in this line right here, this 33,200,097, which is represented across all these colored bars in the same way. And so what those different colored bars represent are different methods for allocating the cost to the 4 member towns. We've had an ongoing conversation with each of the 4 communities about how we should do that allocation of those costs. We had a 4 towns meeting in November where we talked about the mechanics of those different assessment methods. The recommendations of a series of those that people wanted to look at are represented here. I'll come back to those in just a minute. What I want to talk about in the next few minutes is just sort of what are the assumptions about revenue streams other than from the 4 towns. I've held Chapter 70, which is on this line right here, steady for the same number as we have this year. It's likely to go up a little bit. Typically for us, it goes up a small amount, $35,000 to $40,000. We may be in a circumstance that's more fortunate than that. I didn't want to presume that. So I've kept our Chapter 70 funding at the same level as it is this year. As we look into those other other revenue streams that are sort of just demonstrated here in the middle of the screen, largely kept most of those revenue sources fairly steady with past projections as well. We receive transportation reimbursement. So as a regional school district, some of our transportation is eligible for reimbursement from the state. It's been a tricky thing to project over the last year or so. We did a lot less transportation, and yet we still had transportation costs. But I think that estimate of $800,000 worth of support from the state to cover our costs is a pretty reasonable estimate for the coming year. Medicaid reimbursement, we provide a series of services that are eligible for Medicaid reimbursement. And so when we were in fully remote for most of last year, we did a lot less of that. We're working our way back into that. And so I do expect us to generate more of that kind of revenue during the year next year, but I'm still being fairly cautious with that estimate. Charter reimbursement, I have to say that I've held that steady. I think that the difficulty we have with both the reimbursement, which is shown here, and the expense, which was on the previous page for charter school tuition, is tricky to predict. You know, the enrollments in the state for school age children in last school year dropped by a solid 5% across the state, and they've held flat this year. So I think I was the October numbers for the statewide, the difference between October of 2020 and 2021 for the entirety of the state, which is nearly 1 million children, the difference between the two sets of numbers was like 50, or some ridiculously small increment like that. There's usually so I think that means that it's likely that our charter reimbursement and our charter tuitions are going to hold fairly steady to what we've seen in past years. But it's, again, a difficult one to know for sure. But I've taken a fairly conservative approach to that as far as predicting revenue from that charter reimbursement. Our interest will hold steady. Our interest income will hold steady. I'm going to skip down to the bottom. E&D for contingency. We take a portion. E&D is our reserve or our sort of savings account. We usually take a fixed amount of $280,000 and sort of hold that for contingency purposes. If anything unexpected were to happen during the fiscal year, whether it be, I mean, we did it this year, we've done it in previous years, we'll do it for next year as well. We don't have an expectation of necessarily spending that money, but it is available to us if something were to happen. So we do keep that E&D contingency, but we also use our E&D for just regular budget support. As you notice, the white column for fiscal 22, you'll notice that number is $200,000 for budget support. By virtue of how fiscal 20 finished, the amount of available funds in our budget for 22 was significantly less. So we took a very conservative approach to how much was available and how much was going to be used in the current fiscal year from E&D. Fiscal 21, we were very cautious with our spending, and therefore we ended the year in a very, very positive circumstance. So our E&D grew. And so our, the amount of savings that we had available for us was much more significant. There are limits on how much of that we can hold, so we can't hang on to it forever. If we're above the statutory limits of that, then we have to essentially give it back to the member towns. But we should have a fairly strong amount of that resource available to us to help fund our budget. So that's why the number of 700,000 is there. The thing to keep in mind about that is as we move forward into, say, next year, that's one-time money. So it's while we're hopeful to have some E&D support in subsequent years, it's not likely to stay at that level of support. So I just want to have people keep that in mind as we look to future years, that that revenue is going to be unlikely to be as large as we're predicting for the coming year. But again, those are all of those estimates of that various reimbursements and funding sources are ones that we can continue to work with and think about, and we'll refine over the next few weeks as we go ahead, and at some point we'll sort of lock in those numbers. But if more complete information is available to us, we might adjust those as well. But what that does is all of those different resources that come to us and are available to us with Chapter 70 and those reimbursements reduce, are applied to our expenses. And so our expenses are at a little over 33 million as we currently project them. We've got about 11.8 million in revenue from those different sources. And so what that means is the remaining 21,421,000 and change is what needs to be assessed to the 4 communities. And so what you're seeing with the different colors is different ways in which we sort of slice that up amongst the 4 towns. And so starting from the far right, that is what's determined, what is classically called the regional agreement method. Our regional agreement has a method defined that uses a 5-year rolling average of the students in each town to apportion the costs. The state has what is called a statutory method. Any method other than the statutory method is considered an alternative method. So our regional agreement method, if we were to go with that, would be considered an alternative method. The statutory method has a component that utilizes ability to pay, and it requires the communities to have a minimum local contribution. Once you get above that minimum local contribution, then the remainder of the costs are apportioned based on your regional agreement. And so the statutory method, which is shown in that kind of peach color, See if I can get the cursor to sort of show the column here. That statutory method, that minimum local contribution is a number that changes every year, and they give it, much like Chapter 70. You know, you will get an estimate of what that number is toward the end of January. That number can actually change by the time the actual budget at the state level is finalized. And so, what we have done over the last several years is to take the, much like we do with the regional agreement method and the 5-year average of student population, we've done the similar sort of thing with those local contributions and take the 5 previous years' local contributions, average those, and then use that as a component to calculating the allocation for each of the member towns. And so, if we were to use that fully, that 5-year average fully, then we'd utilize this sort of pink color here, and that would be utilizing the full amount of the 5-year average of local contributions, and then the remainder allocated by the regional agreement method. And then what the other 4 columns represent are taking that 5-year average of local contributions, using a percentage of that, and so that shrinks the amount that is apportioned by that statutory style method, and a larger amount is apportioned by the regional agreement method. And so the current year we're using the 65%, which is a sort of terracotta color. Some communities, Leverett, Shrewsbury in particular, are in very different places, and Amherst in some respects are in different places relative to which method we'd like to head toward. We do ultimately have to pick an assessment method. The thing to keep in mind about those assessment methods, because they're an alternative method, it requires all 4 communities to agree to whatever method that is. And that is part of the passing the budget. So all 4 communities have to agree to that alternative assessment method. We have to do some once we agree to a method, we need to get that okayed by the state. But what we're seeing here is in this section, which is the part that, you know, when we meet on Saturday at the 4 Towns meeting, that's the section that people are going to care about, because that's going to be the impact on a particular community's request from the regional schools for the budget for the coming year. And so what we see here is that, you know, with no adjustments relative to our current predictions and that sort of thing, the ranges for each of the communities are probably at present a little higher than what they can actually afford at the moment. And so we'll probably have to do some additional refinement of these numbers to get to a place where each of the 4 towns can meet their obligation to fund our budget for the coming year. And so I think I believe my next slide, if I'm not mistaken, is on capital. So I'm going to stop there, because I think this is probably a pretty decent place before people's brains melt too much for me to stop and kind of sort of take some questions from folks and see what things are coming up for folks as far as what they need more detail from and on.
All right, and with that, we'll take a first question from Irv.
Yeah, Doug, thank you for that great presentation. I really appreciate it. So what is driving the assumption around legal expenses? When I looked at that, it sort of like jumped out at me. And usually, I thought my assumption was that we were working on some kind of fixed cost contract, but maybe I'm wrong. So could you explain that?
Sure. So I think that, and the superintendent may want to jump in here as well, but what we've seen, is by virtue of being in a pandemic and needing to reach agreement with our unions about some things, we've had some additional negotiations and agreements that we've had to require some legal counsel to provide some additional support for us. And so we have a retainer system that gets us to a certain level of support, but then beyond that, then or things that are outside the retainer contract, then we have to pay for those expenses. But I think the larger thing is that we've just seen, and I don't think we're alone in this, I think this is true across the Commonwealth and across the nation, quite frankly, is that we're having a large number of items brought that need legal representation and legal advice on relative to management and labor, and questions, conflicts, concerns that get raised. And so we've just seen an increase in the number of those, and so that's increased our costs in that area. And like I said, as I reviewed the budget, if it was a 1-year thing, then I wouldn't necessarily make the adjustment I've made. But I think we've seen a steadily increasing and steadily held an amount of expense there. So I felt it was necessary to sort of bump that up a little bit.
All right. And then the other thing that sort of jumped out at me almost immediately was the English learner ed reduction. And what's driving that?
Go back. Oh, the English learner. Yeah, so we've changed a little bit of the model of how we are doing the English learner education. So in regard to one of the big costs in that section of the expense was traditionally tutors. So we'd hire people on an ad hoc basis to come in and provide support to students who need support in acquiring language skills. We've shifted a little bit over the last year or so to hire more staff. So the expense really hasn't gone away. It sort of shifted into the sort of salary section and sort of out of that section. So it's really not that we've reduced our cost that much, but we found, in looking at the model a little bit and having conversations with our ELL director, that our coordinator, that having some staff regularly in the building, especially for certain languages, which we have a much higher incidence of students that need support, having those folks on staff is a little better model for us. And so it kind of takes the expense out of the line on the bottom and moves it into the salary section a little bit. So it's more of an adjustment within two different lines than a real reduction. It's not a real change too much in supports for our students.
A point of order for Ben. I have like 4 questions, but I want to know if that is acceptable or should I hold my other questions until other people have the opportunity.
I'm going to try to field that, and I'll take any correction from the previous chair or anyone else that has input. My understanding is that the follow-up to your previous question would be allowable, and then a new idea, a new question, you'd have to raise your hand for that after the fact. Is that about correct? Folks in the fire. Good. With that, I will take Mike next. I assume I'll see another hand from Irv at some point soon.
Yep. And just to follow up on that point that Dr. Slaughter made, we had an external review of our English language learner programs done right around the beginning of the pandemic. And that was the recommendation of the external review, was that tutors are great in terms of translation, but we needed more English language staff who were teachers instead of staff who were doing translations. So we made that switch. So it is a little deceptive because of the nature of budget lines and how this is structured. But it wasn't just based on our thoughts on it. We were wondering about models, particularly at the secondary level, and got feedback and have implemented the models that were suggested.
And Jennifer.
Yeah, the special education line looks like it's been very volatile from year to year, especially from 21 to 22 is cut in half. And now we see a small percentage increase, but a sizable amount increase from 22 to 23. What's going on there?
So one of the largest sort of factors in that area is related to students that are in out of district placements. So there are students that are placed in a variety of settings, and we have more of those in the secondary than you often will see in an elementary. But the number and nature of those kinds of placements are very different from year to year. They can be quite expensive, and we get a lot of support. From both entitlement grants like IDEA, which helps us pay for some of those expenses. We also get a thing called circuit breakers. So once we get above a certain level of expense, then we can file for some support from the state. What we do with circuit breaker money is we incur the expense in 1 year. The following year they pay it to us, we utilize it in the year after that. So there's this lag of a year or so before we spend it. So if you have an uptick in the number of students, you sort of recoup that a year or so later. So that tends to cause a little bit of that accordion effect. And some of it depends on the nature of who the kids are, how many of them we have, what the nature of their need is. And so, it does have quite a bit of variability, and I mean, there are other factors in there. Those are the sort of larger aspects of what influences that. And so sometimes, we'll make different decisions based on, like I say, the resources. So sometimes we have a greater amount of circuit breaker money that has come in from a previous year's efforts. And so it allows us to sort of squeeze down that number a little bit. And then, in a subsequent year, we don't have as much, and so we have to carry a little bit more of that burden. And so, we're always, sort of trying to manage the needs of the kids and the cost of those needs, and then the resources we have.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, I would be interested at some point in the future to have that line broken out between out-of-district spending and in-district spending. I would be curious to see that.
Yeah, I think the only concern I have there is when we go is just about identifiability of students. That's the thing that happens to us, because the number of kids that are out of district is really a small number, and so it can get that's just a concern. We'd have to be thoughtful about that as we went ahead and represented that, but at the same time, it's really fully appreciate that and understand that. And when we go into when we get the fuller budget book in a few weeks, and we get to kind of a line by line, it'll be a little easier to sort of see which pieces are which. The hard part is, and I've been debating about how best to represent this, is when we leverage things like circuit breaker to help reduce those costs. How do we clearly demonstrate we applied it at this point versus this point because we can leverage those funds in a number of places, and sometimes we use them in a single area of the budget, single line of the budget, and sometimes we use it over 3 or 4 different lines of the budget because we have that flexibility to do that. So how to represent the use of those kind of funds. Similarly, school choice has the same sort of thing. We typically use those in only 1 or 2 places, but it's without having had the full explanation from me, it's not always visually easy to sort of spot where those things happen. And so that's one of those things I'm going to try to make clear as we move ahead. But
thank you.
And Irv?
Two things, well, not two things, 2 questions. The central administration increase, what was driving that? And the second is, have you listed all sources of income revenue here on this budget summary?
So the central administration, again, most of that increase is driven by those legal expenses we spoke of earlier. So it's almost all of it is in that realm. There are a couple other areas that obviously, some things went up, some things went down in there, but the big driver in that particular section of the budget is that legal fees and legal costs that we're seeing over the last few years, and so that's the big driver there. As far as the source of revenue, most of them, I mean, obviously, what is not displayed on that other chart, and I'll switch to it here real quick if I can. This is not demonstrating. This isn't just demonstrating our grants. This isn't demonstrating our some of our revolving funds. It's not demonstrating local donations and that sort of thing. So this is mostly about things that would be considered sort of appropriation or sort of tax-based supports for our district. So, like I said, the next thing that we'll produce is a much bigger book that will have those sort of grant funds and
I should call. Well, should cover the medication. Penny, would you do me a favor and see when CVS closes?
Irv, you should mute your phone, your computer.
And we issue still not resolved from the Amherst media end.
Did they give any indication as to like how long they thought it might be or what?
The only thing I heard is they're working on it.
does it make sense to take another 5, or like if people can't hear it live?
So a couple of things you could think about. Suggestions for the committee would be we could actually go to executive session.
And then come back and then hopefully.
Yeah, to give them time. And if they can't resolve it, then I think they can't resolve it. I know it's a little awkward that way, but just I know there's some time sensitive stuff in executive session. I'm a little concerned. It's nearing 9 o'clock. We have a bunch of agenda items left. So it's just one idea for your all consideration. But I didn't get more of an update other than that they're working on it. So I'll leave it for you all to figure out what the best thing to do is.
Are there any major objections to moving that agenda item up to here and then coming back to where we are now? A thumb up. Nod. All right, so
Just don't forget to call the meeting back in order, because right now we're in recess.
All right. Trying to hunt down this part of the agenda. There we go. Okay, so I am at 8:54 calling back the Amherst Regional School Committee to order. And we are moving on to the agenda item under executive session. So the regional school, this is the part I'm supposed to read, right? Right, Allison? The regional school committee will now consider. Oh, go ahead.
You'll want to change the last sentence to say we'll return to open session.
Roger. And Peter?
That was exactly what I was going to say.
Oh, sweet. All right, so try not to stumble too awkwardly through this.
Well, let me give you, sorry, interrupt you, that I just got a text from people that maybe we're back on live with audio. So before you make a motion that might get forwarded, let me just confirm that with Amherst Media. But I got 3 texts from people saying, oh, I can hear you again. So let me just confirm that. Sorry, Mr. Herring, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just figured you'd rather know that before the motion was made.
Yeah, well, we can wait on my awkward stumbling. Awkwarding. Stumble awkwarding. I like that. I feel like Gene should be playing the Jeopardy theme while we wait to find out if this is wrapped up. Just a request, that's all.
Well, this meeting reminds me of football games where there are just so many penalties and injuries that, the time just keeps stopping and starting and stopping and starting. Oh, well.
So Amherst Media's recommendation is that things are working but not consistently, and they need more time. So all that to say, you had more time to plan the thing you were about to say before I interrupted you.
All right, so let's get back to the stumble awkwarding. All right, so the Regional School Committee will now consider entering executive session in accordance with Open Meeting Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, to conduct collective bargaining sessions and to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation of APEA. If an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares, I do declare, and to approve minutes in accordance with the Open Meeting Law, MGL Chapter 30A, Section 22, with the intent of returning to open session. And we'll go roll call vote.
I'll second that.
Oh, there we go, the second, and then now roll call vote. We'll start with, I was going to start with Stephen. We'll start with Allison.
Allison, aye.
Irv.
Irv, aye.
Sarah Bess.
Sarah Bess, aye.
And Peter.
Peter, aye.
Jennifer.
Aye.
Jean.
Gene, aye.
And Steve.
Steve and I.
And Ben also I. So we'll now enter into executive. Oh, go. Moving everywhere. Go ahead, Jenna.
I was going to say we have non-members in the meet, but it looks like they're gone.
well versed enough to offer real confidence about whether that would matter.
Irv, you wanted to weigh in?
No, I didn't. I'm done.
Oh, okay. So what's the general consensus? Do we slog through this and then able to rest and meet again, or go ahead, Peter?
So, I mean, in the spirit of trying to come to consensus, I think we could probably table what we know definitively is compliant with open meeting law or not. If we're just trying to do the spirit of making our meetings as accessible as possible, if we're all available to meet Saturday, then we could try and do what Dr. Morris suggested and meet before that meeting. Which, I mean, and as I'm talking through this, it has the advantage that it's late, and I know Dr. Morris was joking about being tired, but I will admit that after a few hours of intensive focus, my ability to effectively participate in these meetings wanes. Perhaps the similar experience with others. So I'm fine with trying to with tabling whatever we were able to for Saturday.
Sarah?
Can I make a suggestion that we table our budget conversation until Saturday morning and then pick a different time than Saturday morning to continue the rest of the meeting that we are not going to be able to finish tonight? Right. I don't have the agenda up, but there's like a few other things that are fairly important that need to get done before, right? There's like the policy
review.
Yep. That the policy subcommittee needs our input on, right? Before, sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my inclination is towards kind of revisiting the budget prior to the meeting on Saturday, and then setting up another meeting to cover the rest of the topics here. And of course, now the audio is fixed. That's awesome. Super awesome. All right. So do we need a vote on that, or go ahead, Allison?
So from the policy subcommittee perspective, we could do two things. If the audio is fixed, we could just take a look at that as a first read so that the policy subcommittee can work on it tomorrow. Or we table that. The policy subcommittee meets again on the 24th, which is after the 18th. So if we can get those reviewed for the first read before the 24th, we can do that. And the policy subcommittee has one other thing on the agenda tomorrow that they can still work on, or we take 5 minutes and just bang that out now. I'm indifferent. I'm going to look to my policy subcommittee friends.
Peter?
Just briefly on the policy subcommittee. I'm fine gathering input tonight, but if people feel like they want more time to provide input, that's fine as well. It could go either way. The policy committee is meeting twice this month, so
we could do that the next. All right, so it's sounding like we're going to table the rest for later. Revisit the budget Saturday morning, correct? You got that right? This does not require a vote. So then I would take a motion now. Go ahead, Peter.
So again, not an expert here, but so General Roberts Rules of Order, when we're doing this kind of thing, unless it's controversial and people don't agree with you, it's kind of chair's discretion. If we look around, okay, is it all right if we rejigger the agenda? Can we push this out? Okay.
Yep.
If people are generally okay with it, we don't have to go through the motion and debate and discuss and all that, but it's certainly anyone's prerogative to ask for that.
Yeah. I was thinking a different one, but go ahead, Allison. Sorry.
I might suggest we talk about future agenda planning before we adjourn.
And then wrap after that. Everybody else, is there a consensus on that? All right. So, Allison would still have the document to share. Is that a doable thing right now?
That
I gotta hold it down.
and we can add you to as an editor, Ben.
Yeah.
18th. There was a proposal to have that as a joint meeting on challenges of school leaders in the district. The subcommittee and advisory committee appointments. The Arms Happiness Project. And then the ESSER budget. The budget, one of the things we wanted to look at tonight as part of the budget was also the budget, that input feedback form, so we can push that to the 18th also.
Were there other things folks wanted to add to the next agenda? Okay. Anyone? All right. So that being that, now I would entertain a motion. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
Sorry, just a question. So we're meeting before the Four Towns meeting on Saturday. And did we say what time? Like 8, not earlier than 8, right?
I would suggest, since Dr. Slaughter's mostly through his presentation, I'm looking at Doug a little bit, and it's informational, and we're going to go into a 2-hour meeting. 8:30 is probably sufficient, just so that people get all the information. You've already seen the slides, so that'd be my recommendation to the committee. Certainly, we could even earlier, but I also want to be realistic about people's Saturdays as well. Okay. Does that sound okay to folks?
8:30 works for me, and it would be the same link as the Four Towns meeting?
I would suggest actually we use a different link in that case because, yeah, I would suggest a different link for that, but I will, I'll work with Sasha on getting that posted tomorrow.
Thank you. And then did we say we're going to try to meet again before the 18th?
That was a suggestion that I made until Mike suggested that we review the budget on Saturday before the meeting, and then I was also looking at my calendar to see when the next policy meeting was, and realized that it's after the next region meeting. So
perfect. So we don't need to. Thank you. So now, Ben, were you looking for a motion to adjourn?
I absolutely was at this point. Yes.
Okay, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Oh, there we go, Allison. Second. Let's take a roll call vote. Peter?
Peter, aye.
Irv?
Irv, aye.
Allison?
Allison, aye.
Sarah Bess?
Sarah Bess, aye.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, aye.
And Steve?
Steve and I.
And Ben, aye. It is unanimous. We are adjourned. Sweet.
See you Saturday.
Right and early. All right.